After this presentation, please visit our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and smash that like button and click the bell to get all our new content, because that really helps us out. And stay until the end for more information on donating to AAM. So welcome to another educational and inspiring AAM program. This is Police Liaison Training, effectively handling police during activism. AAM mentors Kristy and Trey will discuss the main role and responsibilities of a police liaison, do's and don'ts when dealing with the police during street activism, effective strategies for safety, and much more. So my name is Michelle Granberg. I'm your moderator. I'm a mentor and team member with Animal Activism Mentorship. I'm located in New Jersey, and I've been a vegan and activist for over 6 years. Our mission is to empower activists to boldly act and equip them with what they need to fight for animal liberation. AAM is a free multinational program supporting new and fledgling animal rights activists to reach their full potential. Founded in 2020, AAM offers a free 3-month mentorship program, which pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. Through one-on-one mentoring, we generate an increased number of effective activists worldwide, because we know this movement needs more activists. Additionally, we offer free workshops that train and educate our mentors, mentees, and the public on various aspects of animal rights activism. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour. We host large-scale in-person activism events around the country. Stay tuned for details. AAM is proud to be fueled by FARM, the Farmed Animal Rights Movement, one of the oldest AR organizations in the country. If you're interested in applying to become a mentor or a mentee, or want to get involved or to donate, please visit our website, animalactivismmentorship.com, and follow both AAM and FARM across social media. Yes. So now I get to introduce Trey and Kristy. They're going to basically introduce themselves, but they're both activists, longtime activists, vegans, and AAM mentors and team members. Okay, so again, after the presentation, hold your questions. We'll have a Q&A portion. So Kristy, I'm turning it over to you now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristy. I've been with AAM since its inception, and I've been police liaisoning for about 3 years, which is the amount of time we've had in-person events. And I'm very happy to share any experience that I've gained over the years and some insight into how to handle these police interactions.
Hey everybody, I'm Trey. I've been with AAM since 2020, since the beginning, and yeah, I've been an activist for a long time, an animal activist for about 6 years, and started police liaisoning shortly after that. Some of it was, a little easier, more mild police liaisoning, working its way up to more like intense actions. So looking forward to sharing some of that with you and probably learning some from you all as well. So excited to hear your questions at the end and yeah, share what we've put together here.
All right, so let's get started. So one thing to keep in mind is that different actions may require different approaches from the police liaison, and we really want to emphasize that laws and ordinances can vary from city to city, county to county, and state to state. This workshop will focus on actions that want to avoid arrest, keep activists safe, and keep the protests as effective as possible. Not all actions have the same goals, but that's what we're mainly focusing on during this presentation. Also, very important, we are not attorneys, so no information in this presentation is legal advice, and if you have a legal concern, you should consult with an attorney for that. So let's talk a little bit about what a police liaison is. Basically, the police liaison is the designated person that is meant to talk and interact with police during the action. It's kind of like the person that is the middle person, right? it is a lot easier to talk to just one person in the action than trying to like talk to a massive group of people. And it just elevates the organization of that protest. So only the designated police liaison should speak with police. And the goals of the police liaison can include keeping activists safe, making sure police are not violating the rights of the activists, and keeping the action as effective as possible, and more. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare for this. So before the action, there's quite a bit of things that you might want to do to prepare for being the police liaison. One, like I mentioned, the laws and ordinances vary from every place. So you want to check what the local laws are for where the action is going to be taking place. And something that you may want to look into as well is the property lines, especially if you're trying to stay on public property. One really great recommendation that I've been using for years is an app called Landglide. Now, the app isn't free, but personally, I find it worth it to have it on hand, and it'll even show you your current location on the map. So it can sometimes be very convenient when interacting with police. If they're trying to say you're on private property, you can literally show them like, look, we're right here. This is public property. So very helpful. Highly recommend to download that. Another consideration is creating a sense of separation between yourself and the action. So you might want to consider wearing neutral clothes with no animal rights messages or organizational affiliations. Some police liaisons will take it a little step further and dress really nicely, maybe wear a button up, because when you're interacting with the police, it's possible for them to profile you. So the way you dress can kind of help guide that interaction. And if you dress nicely, maybe it will bring down any stereotypes that they might have based on your appearance. Another thing to do right before the action is to address the activists that are participating. So I always like having a set of things that I want to talk about with them. So one of the main things is reminding them not to speak with police, except to point them to the police liaison. But there's a few other things that we want to mention. One, you may want to mention like what the risk level of that action is. So for example, if it's a legal protest on public property, it's low risk. That doesn't mean it's no risk, but it's low risk. And it's really important to just keep them informed of what that risk level is. And I'll also talk about a few do's and don'ts. So some examples are, if a police officer approaches you, don't say anyone's name, just point them directly to the police liaison. Also, not to talk to the police, except for pointing out the person that they should be speaking to. And when you're doing this, not to say anyone's name or whoever the liaison is, if it's yourself, not to say your name, because that's up to everybody's own personal consent, whether or not they want to share their name. So you can use like a visual description. Like in my case, I talked to the girl with the purple hair, or talk to the person wearing the red shirt. You can give a physical description of what they're wearing and point them out if they haven't already started walking towards the police officer at that time. It's important to keep most of the things that we're talking about in this presentation pertains to the United States, since that's where we're based out of. So do look up your local laws and make that message based on what those laws are. So I'm going to give some examples for the United States. I will usually say, don't talk to the police. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Point out the person, don't say anyone's names, don't say anything that could possibly incriminate you. And another important thing that I like to include when addressing the activists before the action is some de-escalation tactics. Sometimes people on the street might incite something with you. They don't like your message. They might get loud. They might get somewhat aggressive. If anyone touches anyone, you can say firmly, don't touch me. That's assault. Usually that will get the person to kind of be more mindful of their actions. But it's also really important as activists speaking up for animals that we remain focused on the animals and not try to get in an altercation with the public. So even if somebody is starting something with us, we want to use some de-escalation tactics and possibly walk away. So it's really important to remind the activists of this. One, because it affects the job of the police liaison. So, if I'm police liaison and I'm like, this is a peaceful demonstration, First Amendment rights, and then all of a sudden something breaks out in the crowd, I'm kind of like lying to the police at that point because I just said we were peaceful. So really important to address them ahead of time, tell them the do's and don'ts, such as like if you're standing on a sidewalk, leave room for people to walk by, don't block any entrances, don't touch any property of, if you're at a business or anything, don't touch their property, don't touch their doors, their windows, anything, because it's really important that they know that ahead of time. Now, before the action, there should also be a plan in place just in case the police liaison is arrested. Something that can be spoken about with the organizers, whether or not the action may continue or not continue, who's going to be offering support to, jail support and all of that. That should be handled ahead of time. I'm not saying that for sure if you're a police liaison, you will get arrested, but it's important to keep all the possibilities in mind, because as a police liaison, you're a slightly higher risk since you're the ones that are interacting with the police. Another good thing is to establish a way of communicating with organizers or their group using hand signals. So as a police liaison, while you are speaking with the police, you're the one that's assessing the risk level at that moment, and you know what the police are saying. So using some hand signals can let them know like what's going on. Like if you need to wrap it up and you think it would be better to leave, you can start using signals like wrap it up, like let's head on out, and establish any others that you might see as necessary to communicate with the group that don't require you to constantly be moving back and forth, although you may well be moving back and forth to communicate messages between everyone and the police. Another important thing to consider is asking organizers what you should know, and also like maybe them not telling you things that you shouldn't know. It's important to remember that it is a crime to lie to the police. So if there's something you shouldn't know it, and they shouldn't tell you it, but only the important information that you should know. With that said, organizers and police liaisons should be truthful. I kind of mentioned this already about the level of risk involved with the action before and during, which can change. So the risk level may be very low in the beginning, and as you're talking to police, you realize that it's raising. You should inform the activists that, maybe the de-escalation isn't working so well, and everyone can assess the risk level based on your information from there. There's no such thing as a no-risk action. There may be low-risk actions, but again, as a police liaison, we're trusted with the activists, but we also have no control over what the police does. So it's important to communicate what's going on during that interaction. Very, very, very important. Have a plan to film and be sure your equipment is ready. So if you're using like a camera, making sure that all the batteries are charged, the memory cards are cleared, there's enough storage on your device to film for as long as you need. Every single police interaction should be recorded. I cannot stress this enough. They may be filming themselves, but that's okay. It's a lot easier to get footage that you've already recorded than to try and fill out an open records request for their footage. That could take ages, and you never know what might happen with that footage or when they weren't recording or any of that. So just to be safe, always have your interactions being recorded, and consider recruiting an activist whose sole duty is at the action is to film your interactions with the police, maybe from a different angle. Never hurts to have your angle and another angle to really show what's going on. And it can act somewhat as a deterrent, right? Police know they're being filmed, so they're less likely to do something they shouldn't do when they're on film. Not saying that always happens, but it's a good deterrent to let them know that you are filming them. However, like I mentioned, it's important to know the laws where you are. In the United States, it's a right to film the police in the course of their action, in the course of their duties. I don't know what that might look like in other countries, so please look into that ahead of time. So then you've done all this planning, and now the action has started. it's a good idea to find a spot that gives you a good vantage point of the action, where you'll also be able to spot police when they arrive. You know, sometimes you might be directly at the action, but it could be better to be further back away, where you have kind of like that bird's eye view of the action. And that way you can walk up to police and avoid them walking up. Usually they'll try to approach whoever's doing a speak out or leading chance. You can kind of interject yourself before they reach that point, if that's the goal. Sometimes different actions have different goals. That's personally the way I like to do things. I like to try to minimize the contact between the activists and the police as much as possible. So I want to approach the police before they've ever approached anybody else. All right, now when filming, it's important that if you're using your cell phone, make sure that your cell phone is not unlocked while in use, because now, you know, if anything were to happen and if they were to get your device for any reason, they have your unlocked phone, right? So I don't know how to do this on all phones, but I know that on an iPhone, you can disable Face ID or Touch ID, and you can use like the little, oh, you're not going to see it, but there's a little camera icon that's on your lock screen that you can press on firmly, and it basically only opens up the camera, and it doesn't allow access to anything else on the device, only the footage that you just took. Now, also really important is to consider filming wide angle so that you can capture more. You can either do this by choosing a more wide angle lens on your camera, or filming in landscape mode like this, as opposed to like this. Like this, you're going to capture a wider view. And then if you happen to be arrested, try your best to lock your phone and hand it off to a trusted activist before you're in cuffs, but do not resist arrest in order to do this. I do have like a quick little shortcut. Then you can just lock your phone by pressing the lock screen button. But another way to like make sure that, let's say you forgot to turn off Face ID or Touch ID, a nice way to make sure that it's now requiring a code is you can press that button 5 times and it'll do that really quickly. I don't know what it's like on an Android, so if anybody knows it, drop it in the chat, or our Android peeps would really appreciate that. And also for my own knowledge, I would like to know how to prepare everyone. All right, so I believe next we're going to talk about what to do during the interaction. So I'm going to pass that on to Trey. Oh, I think there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, I know with my phone, you can just, I have an iPhone, I don't remember which one it is, but you can just swipe your home screen like to the left, and then you'll be in camera mode. And if you film with that, then, you know, your phone is still locked while you're still able to film at the same time. So that's a good little tip, if depending on what kind of phone you have. But so when speaking to police, you want to ask yourself a few questions, like while you're speaking to them. One is, am I telling the truth? And sometimes you may not want to know the truth, depending on the kind of action that you're doing. Maybe the organizer doesn't have to tell you everything that's going on with this action. You know, if it's something that you wouldn't want to, you know, repeat to police, for example. So maybe sometimes it's good to just be on a need to know basis with things like that. But if you do know something that you don't want to say to the police, maybe just don't make a comment on that. You also want to ask yourself, am I being a snitch? So that can look like several different things. Did I just say somebody else's name out loud? You know, if Crystal is standing in front of the door blocking the entrance, and I say, hey, Crystal, don't block the door, you're blocking the door. I've said out loud that she's blocking the door at that point, and I've also said her name out loud, right? So you just want to find another way to say something like that, because you don't want to be a snitch. Okay, you don't want to tell police about anything anybody else is doing other than, you know, hey, you know, they told me that this is a peaceful, you know, protest. again, we talked about it earlier, but what is the current risk level? You are basically like the eyes and ears for everybody else at the protest. They are wrapped up in the protest. They may not have any idea what your interaction with the police has been like, and they are basically trusting you to make that assessment, which is a big responsibility. So you want to make sure that you're assessing that as well as you can. Now, we can't always predict a cop's actions. We don't know what they're going to do next necessarily, but we can try to get as good of a pulse on it as we can. So keep that in mind, and you know, think about, well, what information would I want to know as a participant in this protest if it were me and somebody else was the police liaison? You know, if the cops are saying we're about to round everybody up and arrest everybody, you know, maybe that's something that people need to know. Or if you're getting that feeling, you know, then maybe that's something people ought to know as well. So keep all that in mind. You're the eyes and the ears of everyone else, and you need to figure out how you're going to relay that information to people when it's necessary. And that brings up another good point about being a snitch. So you don't want to reveal who the organizers are. I think this is on a slide later, but you don't want to reveal who organizers are, because that's being a snitch also. So when you talk to people, you want to make sure and you pass information along to other people in the protest. You want to make sure you're not revealing who the organizer is. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But yeah, of course, like I just mentioned, our organizers and activists are aware of the current risk level. If you think they need to be, then do so. You know, let them know. Maybe you've established some hand signals like we talked about earlier, or maybe you just need to go up and talk to somebody and let them know, or maybe you even need to take it a step further. If you've worked something out with the organizer where they say, hey, you can make this call, then maybe you even just say it out loud yourself. Hey, everybody, let's go, or do your hand signal, or say, let's go do something else, or whatever the case may be. You can go on, Kristy. So when speaking to police, it's great protocol to ask for their name and badge number, just so you know who you're dealing with. Sometimes cops are smart alecks and they say, oh, I don't have a badge number, because some departments call it ID numbers. So if they say, I don't have a badge number, ask for their ID number. It's usually one of those two things. Sometimes they'll say, hey, it's right here on my chest. If you want to press the issue, you can. If you don't, just zoom in on their name and zoom in on their badge number so that you know that you have it while you're filming. So remember that police may do something to try to derail the action or make it less effective. So this can look like a number of different things. This can be making up fake laws, intentionally misinterpreting existing ordinances, using scare tactics, like bringing a bunch of cops out for a peaceful protest. You know, 20 of them show up to try to scare you, even though you're not doing anything illegal. And maybe they don't even have an intention of trying to, you know, wrongfully arrest anybody, but they'll use scare tactics and they'll use anything they can to make your protest less effective sometimes. So keep that in mind and try to stay on top of that. You know, if it's a BS ordinance, then, you know, look it up and explain to them, you know, whatever you got to do, get them to call a supervisor so you can talk to their supervisor. Sometimes that doesn't do much good. Sometimes it does. But you want to try to stay on top of everything that you can to keep the action as effective as possible. If the cops are trying to take away your ability to use megaphones and whistles, then you need that ordinance. You need to figure that out, and you need to see what the ordinance is. And then if it seems to not be legit, then you need to let them know about it, ask for their supervisor, you know, see what's up, pull every trick out of your pocket that you can to try to keep the protest effective. Be non-threatening, calm, and confident. So, you know, if you're sitting there trying to get in a legal debate with a police officer, it's probably not going to go well for you because you probably know the law better than they do, but they don't want to admit it. And in a lot of instances, or maybe you don't, it just depends. But a lot of cops really just don't know the law too well. They're more about just trying to stifle your protests however they can. Remain calm, try to be as professional as possible, and remain confident, because while you don't want to get in an argument with a police officer, if you can avoid it. Maybe sometimes you can't, but if you can avoid it, you should. And exuding some confidence lets them know that they're not going to be able to run all over you and use their basic tricks that they might use on someone else. So the other thing you want to do is remain alert to what both the activists are doing at all times and what the police are doing to the best of your ability. That can mean a number of different things. You want to know, like, are the activists kind of pushing the legal limit, or are they not? And are the police, are they starting to surround people or something, or are there's only two of them and they're chilling over on the corner? Are they, what are they saying on their radios? Like, you just kind of want to be as aware as you can of everything. Go ahead, Kristy. So you want to attempt to flex your rights in a non-confrontational way. Again, that goes back to, having that confidence, but not necessarily, getting in a shouting match with a police officer. You want to buy time for activists if they need it, or speed police up if needed. So, for example, if a police officer comes up and says, we can't use the megaphones and the whistles. Well, the megaphones and the whistles are going to help your protests be effective, because you're trying to be as annoying as possible, or whatever, to the customers, to the people that work there, whoever. So the cop says, hey, you can't use that anymore. And you say, okay, well, what's the ordinance? And they say, well, I'll get it to you. Give me 10 minutes. And you're like, okay. So in that instance, you're trying to talk to them as long as possible and stay in a conversation with them before you have to tell everybody to stop using the megaphones. You're trying to buy some time. And sometimes when you ask for the ordinance, they'll let the action continue until they find out what the ordinance is. But sometimes they'll ask you to stop until you find out what the ordinance is. Now, it's your job as the police liaison to kind of figure out what you should push and what you shouldn't, depending on the individual that you're speaking to as far as the cop goes. But if you do decide to tell everybody to stop until they can give you the ordinance, then you're checking in with the cop every once in a while saying, hey, did you find that yet? You want to let them know time's a ticking, you're waiting on them. So you want to try to speed that up, or in some instances you want to slow things down. So you want to just figure out the little tricks to be able to do that. You also want to de-escalate tensions between police and activists when possible, if needed. Like Kristy said before, like every action has different goals. But if your goal is to not have anybody be arrested and do your legal protests, there's no sense in anybody other than the police liaison talking to the cops, really, in most cases. So try to do that. And yeah, you don't want anybody getting up in a cop's face or anything like that. So just try to de-escalate that as much as you can. You also want to hold police accountable when needed. So if they're giving you like a crap law that doesn't exist, or misinterpreting an ordinance to bend it to their will to fit this situation, or whatever, then you got to call them out on it. You got to call them out on it and get them to explain it to you. Call their sergeant or their supervisor or whoever, hold them accountable. Activists, different activists have different theories on whether it's worth it to file complaints or not. If you file a complaint, obviously the department has your name and your information at that point, but and who knows how much filing a complaint actually helps anything. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But it's up to you and your group to figure out what holding police accountable means. And of course, you're trying to keep everyone safe from arrest or bodily harm at all times. If you're in a, me, I'm a big dude or whatever, like I don't have any problem like stepping between like some people if I need to or whatever. So, whatever you're comfortable with and whatever, I guess risk you're willing to take there. But, don't put yourself in harm's way if you don't think you can or whatever. But, or you feel uncomfortable. And hopefully it won't ever get to that, but you just want to do everything you can. And if you can't do it by physically stepping in between two people, maybe there's another way that you can do it. Say, hey, if a passerby is, assaulting an activist or something, you say, hey, that's assault, like film them, whatever deterrent you can use. But just, be safe while doing so as much as you can. All right, Kristy.
Another way to hold police accountable, at least in the United States, is to remind them that they swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And right now what they're doing is violating our First Amendment rights. So sometimes that can help. And I like to get ahead of this personally. Everyone has their own little tactics, but usually when I approach a police officer, I might say like, thank you for coming here to uphold everyone's First Amendment rights. Because it kind of like reminds them of that right off the bat. But again, everyone has their own way of doing things.
So, like I mentioned before, you don't want to reveal who the organizers are if there are any. And you may not do this intentionally, so you really have to think about it, because if the cops know who the organizers are, they might think, okay, if we can scare the organizers, or if we can arrest the organizers, whether it be a legitimate arrest or not, maybe that'll make all the actions fall apart, or maybe everybody else will be scared if they don't have a so-called leader or whatever. So if there are organizers to your event, then you don't, and you're the police liaison, or you're anyone really, but in this context, police liaison, you don't want to reveal who the organizers are. So, if you need to relay something to an organizer, then you need to have something set up and in place, whether that's texting on Signal, or whether that is, walking up to 7 different activists, and maybe to 6 of them, you say, hey, hope you're doing okay, buddy. Good job. And then to one of them, you say what you need to say or whatever it is. And then that way, the cop thinks you're just kind of like telling the whole crowd. Sometimes I'll do something like I'll go talk to as many activists as I can. I'll say, hey, here's the information, pass it on. So that way the information can get out a little more quickly. Of course, you run the risk of the information getting twisted that way, but if it's a simple message, it's usually fine. So yeah, you don't want to say anyone's name out loud. That is, whether you mean to or not, that's snitching. So you don't want to do that. Accidents happen, but do your best, okay? Because people don't want their names given to the cops, and the cops don't need our names, on principle, if nothing else. And not only is it good security culture, but on principle, they don't need to know our names when we're at an action, if we're not doing anything illegal, and they don't suspect us of doing anything illegal. You don't want to say anything potentially incriminating. So if you're, people use different tactics when speaking to the police. Some people use like a different, I guess, I don't know, mood or whatever. Like either you're trying to be chummy with them, or or appear like you're being chummy with them, or maybe you're kind of more like the neutral person, or however you're playing it, or however you actually are. If you don't want to you don't want to, your lips start moving and you start saying things that maybe you shouldn't have said. I'm going to show an example of that later where I made a small mistake, you know, and I'll point that out in the video that we're going to show in a bit. But you definitely don't want to say anything potentially incriminating, like I said about the person standing in front of the door earlier. Again, don't get too comfortable with them in conversation, and don't give them any unnecessary information. Now, when you're a police liaison, maybe there's some information that is unnecessary that is a good enough trade-off to get in their good graces and make them feel like you're on their side or something. But most of the time, I think it's best just to shut your mouth and not give them any unnecessary information. All right. So they're going to try to get as much information out of you as possible, and they're going to dig for information. They're trained to do this, and they're legally able to lie to you, and they will do it. No matter how nice they seem, if this seems like the best apple of them all, they can still lie to you, and they will. So remember that you always have the right to remain silent if it gets to that point. If you've already said everything you need to say, then you can just shut up. You don't ever have to answer their questions. I mean, as the police liaison, like, you're kind of, you know, trying to talk to them somewhat so that nobody else has to. But ultimately, like, if it's getting kind of murky, like, you don't have to answer their questions. But if you do, you should be mindful about how you say it, and remember that what you say may not only be used against you, but your friends and the people who are fighting for the same thing you are, and you do not want that to happen. That is of utmost importance. So Kristy talked earlier about creating a little bit of separation between you and the other activists, and kind of designating yourself as like a go-between type person. And one thing you can do to do that is watch your language as far as saying we or they. So if you say we, it makes you seem like you're on the same team as the people who are screaming their heads off over here. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of want to seem like, hey, oh, I'm the rational one, you know, talk to me. All they're trying to do is this, and, you know, whatever. So if you say they in reference to the activists, that creates a little bit of space that I think is good. So here are some examples. The text in red is what you should not do. The text in green is what you should do. And for my colorblind friends, the first answer is what you shouldn't do, and the second answer is what you should do. So if the officer says, who's in charge here? Don't say, I am, what do you need? Don't say that, because you don't want to appear like you're in charge. You don't want to let them know who's in charge, even if it is you, in theory. I mean, you know, I mean, what does in charge mean? You know what I mean? Like, what does that even mean? But
we're all volunteers here.
We're all volunteers.
Everyone's volunteers here.
Nobody's in charge. That's usually what you should say. So, you know, what I would say is, no one's in charge, but I can speak with you. And then if the officer says, hey, they're blocking the door, if they don't stop, they'll be arrested. Let me talk to Crystal and Alfonso, the organizers, and ask them to stop. Okay. Hopefully you can see what's wrong with that after, you know, what I've said already. Not only am I naming people, but I'm outing them as organizers, all in this one sentence of just a handful of words here. That is not what you want to do. And if you don't train yourself to think this way, sentences like that can just come out. So you really have to show some discipline. What I would say is just give me a moment to speak with the activists, or give me a moment to speak with the group, or something like that. That's it. All right. So if the officers, again, we talked earlier about what information the cops need? Like, is it necessary for them to know every detail about your protest? No, it's not. How long do they plan on being here? If you want to say, well, we'll probably take a lunch break around 12 and then be back at around 2. First of all, if that's true, they don't need to know that information. If it's not true, then you're lying to the police, which you can get in trouble for. And if you think it's true, but then it doesn't end up being true, then they could interpret that as lying to the police. And also, if you leave at 12, they don't need to know that. And if they see you leave, they don't need to know you're coming back at 2. So just chill out and say, I'm not sure. I don't know. They didn't tell me. You know, we'll see how it goes. You know, so if an officer says, hey, they have to stop using the megaphones, instead of saying, oh, okay, all right, they got to stop, cool, say, what law is that breaking? Could you show me the ordinance? You know, that's in line with not only buying time, if there actually is an ordinance, or if there's not an ordinance and you're completely in the clear, then you need to hold them accountable and let them know and and it's your job to try to keep that protest as effective as possible. All right. So an officer might, and this goes back to like, how much do you even need to know as a police liaison? Like, does the organizer need to tell you everything? If the officer says, do you know what their plan is? And you say, there's an activist inside the store right now. He's about to drop a banner from the balcony, but don't worry, they're not going to be violent or damage property. They don't need to know that. And maybe you don't even need to know that so that you can truthfully say, I don't know what their plan is. So if you truly don't know what their plan is, then you can say, and you've been kept on a need to know basis, you can say, I don't know the exact plan, but they, sorry, this is a typo, I forgot to fix it, but they told me that they'll remain nonviolent. So that's really all the police need to know. This is a real life example of me talking to a police officer at an action, being the police liaison.
So why did you guys go into the store today? Dumping coffee? What's that? Why did you go in there to protest? You can't go in the store and protest like that. Okay. And who is dumping coffee? So if we get video, you guys can be arrested for damaging the inside of the store for dumping coffee in there. So that's criminal. Like, you can't go into a private business, dump coffee, and damage their property.
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, well, if we run video, then we're going to have to do something. So your group was in there for 5 minutes, causing the scene. There's people with children, families in there. I know you're protesting, and I understand that, but you can't go in there and become outlaws. Okay.
So notice this police officer hasn't even been on the scene for very long, and he's trying to tell me everything that we've done. And he's trying to say, oh, the poor families that have to be around your protest. Oh my goodness. You know, this guy is clearly already, I can tell that he's not trying to do us any favors by protecting our First Amendment right to protest. I already get that vibe, right? He's trying to say that somebody inside the store dumped coffee everywhere. I don't know anything about that. So, you know, I don't know if he's making that up or if it really happened, but you know, I'm not gonna say something like, oh, well, if somebody did, I'm sure it was an accident. I'm not gonna say anything like that. I'm just gonna say, you know, I don't know anything about that. Notice that I've also not said anything about going in the store. He said that the activist went inside the store. I haven't confirmed or denied that. So go ahead and hit play for me.
So you were in there. All of you guys were in there. You know that, right? So do you want us to have them run the video so that we can figure out which one of you guys dumped coffee? You guys are just getting a little out of hand.
Simplify it. You go in there again, entry again, you'll be subjected to being arrested. That's it. Okay? Go on camera. We're done. Okay?
Sure. Can I have your name and badge number real quick, sir? Can I have your name and badge number real quick?
Right there. On video, right? Got you on video as well. A formal notification. You can't be inside there screaming and throwing coffee on the floor.
Access for people to come in and out. You have to be within certain feet from the entrance.
So right here, you can see, he says, you have to be within certain feet of the entrance. Sounds like this guy really knows the law. Certain feet. I don't know what that means or what that is. So, yeah, so you can tell like this first guy, Garcia, he's trying to get me to, admit to all these things that he's saying, admit to somebody dumping coffee in the store, which I don't know anything about. And, all this, that, and the other, so I'm not saying anything. He's talking so fast, I don't have time to reply anyway, even if I wanted to, but I'm just, shutting up on that stuff. And then his buddy comes in and says, hey, let's simplify it. You go in there again, you're going to be arrested. So now he's asking me to keep people certain feet within the entrance. So we'll see how this goes.
From the entrance. So you have the right to protest, but you can't impede on the flow of traffic. This guy is walking with the luggage, so turn your camera. Now you guys are blocking his access. You can't do that.
I can ask them to tighten the circle.
Find a way to get closer this way and not give access to the citizens.
I can ask
want
them
to get hit by a car?
No, I can ask them to tighten the
circle.
circle. Please don't touch me.
Okay.
All right, you can pause it there. So you can tell this dude's so dramatic. Like before, he was saying like, oh, the families that have to experience your protest. And now he's like, do you want somebody to get hit by a car? You can see right here on the sidewalk where it's paused. Like if people wanted to go around, there's plenty of room right here for people to walk. And I don't remember exactly how much room there was on the sidewalk in the spot that he's talking about. He keeps trying to get me to turn my camera so that I can show everyone that's watching my video all the suffering that the people around me are having to go through. They can't get their luggage or whatever. But and then he physically touches me to try to turn me to do that. And when he physically touched me, I said, hey, don't touch me. That's a boundary that I think you should set right away. Say, hey, don't touch me, because if they continue to touch you and you don't say, hey, don't touch me, then they're going to think it's okay. And I've been very cordial and, nice throughout this whole interaction so far. And even then I said, please don't touch me, or don't touch me, please, or whatever I said. I was pretty nice about it, but, if police can't be touching you, so say, don't touch me, please. You also saw that I tried to tell him like 3 times that I can go ask them to tighten the circle up, but he just likes to hear himself talk or whatever. I'm not really sure. He wants to build the drama of it. I don't know. So now I'm going to go try to communicate to the activists that we can't block the sidewalk. So we'll see what happens here. I'm telling everybody just to tighten this circle up a little bit. I'm telling each activist as they go by, hey, just tighten this up a little bit, because it's not going to affect the
Is it illegal to be on this part of the sidewalk as long as we're not blocking it?
Just be on this side so people can walk through.
Is it illegal to be on this side as long as we're not blocking it?
Listen, look at all these people. Turn your camera face so those people can walk through.
Okay, but what does it matter if they cross on this side or this side? I want to be within the law. I'm just saying, you know what I mean?
All right, you can pause it there. So if we create a little more space on the sidewalk for people to get through, that's not going to affect the effectiveness of the protest. We're not really trying to block the sidewalk. We're not really trying to keep anybody from getting where they need to go. So it's not a big deal to tighten the circle up, which I'm trying to do. So you saw that I went over there and I tried to tighten the circle up on the side that was closest to the entrance of the place that the activists were protesting, right? Because it's more effective to be over there. Like it's more of a deterrent for someone that is potentially a customer of this store. And immediately, and he knows that too. So immediately he says, hey, I told you this side. And I said, basically I say, well, is there like a law that says it has to be on this side instead of this side? Like, what's going on here? And you saw eventually he just goes, okay, fine. It doesn't always work out like that, but I think he saw, you know, and that's really the first time I started getting kind of like giving a little bit of pushback to what he was saying. Everything else I pretty much, you know, either shut up or said, okay, I'll go try to do this for you. That was my first little bit of pushback there. And I think I saved it for a good moment, because we want to keep this protest as effective as possible, and having activists near the store is crucial to that. All right.
What do we do? Stand up, fight back!
Just make sure we're not blocking the sidewalk. And don't go onto their property. Make sure we're not blocking the sidewalk. Don't go onto their property. Make sure you're not blocking the sidewalk. Don't go on their property. Make sure you're not blocking the sidewalk. Don't go on their property. Make sure you're not blocking the sidewalk. Don't go on their property. Make sure you're not blocking the sidewalk. Don't go on their property.
Walk through.
Tighten it up. 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 Can y'all back up as far as you can, just so people can get through?
All right, you can pause it there for a second. So, you know, what I'm asking the activists to do is what they actually need to do, but there's maybe also a little bit of theater in it. Because this guy's like, somebody's trying to walk through, the cop, you know, and I'm like, all right, everybody, tighten it up. Somebody's trying to walk through. We gotta get this together. So, you know, you sometimes it's a game of, you know, you want to let the cops know that you're trying to do what they want you to do, right? Which I am here. You know, I am trying to do what they're trying to get me to do, while also keeping the protests as effective as possible. So, you know, it is really hard to, especially while people are like chanting and stuff, to communicate something to so many people. So depending on the size of your protest, you might need to do things differently with this one. You know, I'm kind of just like telling each person as they circle around, like, hey, you know, do this, do that, which I think is fine. And it also takes a little bit more time to do it. Like in this case, we weren't trying to like block the sidewalk or something, but you know, if you were, or you know, maybe it takes a while to tell everybody, you know, depending on how much you think you can push that or whatever. But in this instance, this really doesn't matter. Like, we're not trying to block the sidewalk here, so we were happy to tighten the circle up. I don't think anybody thinks that affected the protest in any way, or the efficiency of the protest. All right, you can hit play.
LVMH has blood on their hands! LVMH has blood on their hands! So much 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 blood on their hands! LVMH, what do you say? How many animals died today? How many animals died today? LVMH, what do you
See, perfect. So that's the cop on the left. You can pause it for a second. So the cop on the left, Morgan, he says perfect. Now, what we've got here is really not that much different than what we started with. And he just called it perfect. So if you can manage something like that, you know, you're good. Now, you know, if we really wanted to push it, and maybe we could have, you know, a lot of times if you're in a picket line, like these activists are in, you can actually legally do that in front of the property, and even obstruct the door as long as you're moving, you're using the sidewalk. It depends on the ordinance. Again, I'll reiterate, because we haven't said it in a while, you know, Kristy and I are not attorneys, and you know, you should seek legal counsel if you have an issue, or legal advice from a lawyer if you have an issue or a question that you know is really crucial. But yeah, I mean, we probably maybe even could have gotten away with doing the circle right in front of the door. I didn't push it because I felt like the protest was still pretty effective, even just kind of halfway walking in front of the door. And if you notice, I've kind of placed myself next to the police, so that the police and myself are actually causing like a little bit of an obstruction to the other side. So, you can think about things like that. Also, I use earplugs. So even though I'm standing next to the police, I can almost kind of indicate when our conversation is over by putting the earplug back in my ear. You'll see in a minute, he tries to say something else to me. I'm like, oh, what, and then put it back in my ear. So we'll see how this part plays out. The part's coming up where I make a mistake or what I think is a mistake, and you can try to point it out before I do, rhetorically. All right, go ahead.
What do you say?
How many animals died today?
You gotta communicate it to so many people. It just takes a second. That's all.
Death train! 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 Death train!
Sorry, I got earplugs in. What was that? Yeah, they're owned by LVMH. Yeah.
Shame on you!
All right, you can pause it for a sec. Oh, that's pretty much it. So, yeah, I would say there, like, I didn't necessarily need to say that Tiffany's is owned by LVMH and that's who we're protesting. I mean, it was on some of the signs. So, I felt like, it wasn't a big deal to say it, but in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have said it. But you're kind of trying to find this balance. Like, is it more beneficial for me to kind of be friendly and give them a bit of information that's probably mostly public or useless? Or, is it better to kind of shut them off at that point? They were happy with us. If I can kind of give them an answer to one little question and plug my ear back up and to signify the conversation is over. I mean, maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not. Yeah, somebody said I indicated that I had information. Yeah, that's one thing that I've got more information that activists have told me about. That's a good point. Or, it could let them know, like, hey, these activists might go protest other LVMH places later this week. Maybe that can tip them off to where the activists are going to be next. So really something just even so simple as that can, give away something that you might not need to give away, or, be harmful in a way that you don't intend for it to be. So you got to even think about little tiny things like that. And again, like, you could argue that it was worth it to give him that one little bit of information just so that we could still be like cool, but it's all in how you look at it. It's just things you should consider, right? Okay. All right. I think we're done with the video. And here's a couple of books that I just recommend. Like, I wouldn't recommend these books as, a crash course for police liaison. In fact, neither one of these books really talk about being a police liaison. But what they do is just give you a little more information about police in general. I mean, Police, a Field Guide, I just finished reading that. It gives you a lot of like vocabulary terms and, a lot of insight into history of police and all that. And this one, Becoming Abolitionists, really talks just about a lot of theory about police, like reform versus abolition and things like that. But it also has a lot of information in it, I think, that is just good to know. It has a lot of like history and stats in it and things like that, just so you can try to navigate the world of police as much as you can. Like, sometimes as a police liaison, you almost need to like think like a cop in those instances, so that you can, better understand them, so that you can know what you need to say to them and how you need to act around them. So I think these two books provide some good insight for that. So I would recommend them. You can get them from the AAM bookshop. When you buy books from the AAM bookshop, AAM gets 10% of the proceeds so that we can put that money toward, events or just keeping these workshops running or, whatever. But, if you can find it cheaper somewhere else, no harm, no foul. I just hope that maybe you'll be interested in reading these books. But if you do want to show AAM some love, you can buy these from the AAM bookshop. All right. That's it, right, Kristy? Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So now, like, our idea was if some people want to give some interactions that they might have had with the police just to see how we would address them. Like maybe you play what the police officer was saying. We'd like to open it up to that, as well as opening it up to any questions that anyone might have put in the chat. Now, I don't know if somebody has track of that because I couldn't see them with the slideshow.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Should we just start with those?
Let's
And
start
at
with
the
the
same
question.
time, if people have, want to give an example of how you guys would handle it or talk about how they handle it and get some feedback. Let's see.
I see a question from David. Is that the first one?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So the question says, at what point are you legally required to identify yourself if a cop asks? And is that a question we should immediately redirect to the liaison? So very good question. Typically, when I'm briefing the activists prior to starting the action, I will inform them of this. At least in the United States, let's keep this in mind. This is United States law. Please, if you're in a different country, look up the laws in your country before taking this as any advice. And it also can vary state to state. So you might want to check what it's like in each state. I know ACLU has like police guides for each state. So you can use that as a good reference. But typically, you're only legally required to identify yourself if you are being detained or arrested. So I will typically inform activists if they ask you for your ID, you don't have to provide it. You don't even have to give them your name, point them in my direction to speak to me. Don't say my name. I personally, and this is just a personal thing, like with what Trey was saying with that give and take, I will typically just give my first name just to, try not to look like I'm being too difficult, although I'm not legally required to do so. I'll also inform the activists, and this might be good information for you. There's a few ways that you can navigate whether or not you are being detained or arrested and give some pushback to that. You can ask, am I being detained or am I being arrested right now? If they say you're being detained, you can push back a little bit more and ask, what crime do you suspect me of committing or about to being committed? Because they do need to have articulable suspicion that you are about to commit or have committed crime. So good questions to ask just to kind of see where it's at and to see if it's actually a detention. But in that case, it depends on the state that you're in. Some states, they don't even require you to identify at that point. But most states do require you to identify yourself or else you get another charge of failure to identify. So very important to know that. And sometimes cops will say, oh, I just need your information for my report. And then if I've already given my first name, I'll say, well, you can put my first name, Kristy, in your report. You don't need my ID for that. And for the most part, that's worked fine. I haven't been forced to give my ID. People who have chosen not to identify themselves, sometimes they might say you can put in your report good citizen or whatever, alias. It's obvious that that's not your name, but refer to me as this in your report. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Trey.
Yeah, I'll just say some good resources are like First Amendment audits on YouTube. If you can find a First Amendment audit like in your area or the area that you plan on protesting, that would be ideal. Of course, you don't want to take, some YouTube video as legal advice, and you don't want to necessarily model yourself after any old First Amendment auditor. But
Especially not as police liaison, because they may have set very different goals.
Yes,
in a
yeah, they
person
do have
response.
very different goals, but you can kind of get an idea on things like having to provide ID. You know, that's something that happens in First Amendment audit videos a lot. So yeah, you definitely don't want to model how you police liaison after a First Amendment audit video, but you can definitely learn a lot. You can see what goes well and what doesn't go so well for people. And keep in mind, you know, our goal as a police liaison is to keep everyone safe and keep everything de-escalated, at least in this context. And you know, a lot of times these First Amendment auditors, their goal is to do whatever they can to piss off police within the law, so that when they trigger a police officer and the officer does something stupid, they can sue them. So that's not what our goal is, particularly with this. So keep that in mind as well.
So Panima and then Mira have their hands up. So we'll go to Panima and then Mira, and then we'll go back to I'll go back to the questions in the chat and go through each of those. So go ahead and unmute Panima if you like.
So what's y'all's opinion on actions not having police liaisons, as opposed to like always having them?
Personally, I think you're better prepared to handle the police if you have a police liaison. It means that that person has hopefully like done some research on what the local laws are. And it's good to not have so many people trying to talk to the police. For the success of the action, it's good to just have one person, you know, bombarding the police and like possibly having people yelling at them or saying something. You know, not everyone at the action might be as knowledgeable as the police liaison on how to interact with the police. So that can definitely potentially damage the action. Now, with that said, if you are doing many actions over, let's say, like, for example, let's say you're coming to the Colorado Convergence and we have like a ton of actions, it might be a good idea to have a different police liaison, especially if there's multiple actions happening in the same municipality, because then police are talking to someone different each time. And people do things a little differently, and it just keeps it fresh, as opposed to like, I told you XYZ last time, you know? So some good things to keep in mind. Do you have anything to add, Trey?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to activism, there, you know, there's not really any handbook or rules to, you know, accomplish what you want to accomplish. I think most of the time a liaison is a good idea, but there might be certain actions where maybe there's a good reason why it's not a good idea, and if that's the case, then you don't have to have one. You know, if your strategy is to never talk to police ever, then maybe you don't need a police liaison. You just stonewall them and, you know, don't talk to them. So, you know, again, none of that's legal advice, but yeah, I mean, I think police liaison is generally good, but, you know, I mean, whatever you decide, you know, there might be an instance where it's okay to not have one, or maybe even better to not have one.
Yeah, thank y'all. I agree. It's, you know, if you're not gonna have a police liaison, like if your action doesn't require it, it's definitely better to just like not talk to, like nobody talk to police, rather than like 6 different people try and like, you know, like all go to the police and say a bunch of different stuff. So yeah, thank you.
Mira, do you want to unmute and answer your question?
Sure. Thank you guys so much. So there were a couple instances where you said like, the response you could give was like, I'm not sure about that. So one of the examples was who the organizers were, and the other one was about people being inside the store spilling coffee. So what if in either of those situations you did know? So if you did know who the organizers were, you just don't respond to them when they ask, or would you try wording something else?
So I mean, if somebody said
like,
who's in charge,
no one's organizing, if that's just not true, that there are organizers.
Right. If somebody, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sorry.
Yeah, if yeah, I mean, I just say, hey, you know, I'm not in charge, but I'll talk to you. And if they ask me, I just don't have to answer. It's very uncomfortable when somebody asks you a question to just completely say nothing.
Right.
But it's what's going to protect you and protect everybody else.
And
So
it won't agitate them more.
I can't control what a cop does
Yeah.
with what I do. What I do know for sure is if I say, yes, I know who they are and I'm not telling you, that's probably not a good idea. And
Right.
if I say, yeah, I knew who they are and that's them over there, their names are such and such and such and such, I definitely know that's a bad idea because that's snitching.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think the best thing to do, usually I don't encounter that. Usually I just say, hey, I'm not in charge. But I'll talk to you. And that's enough for them, usually. But if somebody presses you on it, yeah, I would just invoke your Fifth Amendment right to shut up.
Everyone, there's a volunteer.
Mhm.
Like that's not a lie, and I'm not indicating anyone, but
Right.
that's what I say. Like, and oftentimes, like grassroots activism, it's like there's not really much of a hierarchy,
Right.
So
And,
everyone's a volunteer.
and there's a lot of if you ever watch videos of like false confessions and things like that, it's because the police just go on and on and on and try to get you to say something, and they're really good at it, especially the people who are trained specifically to try to get confessions out of people and things like that. Talking about serious stuff like murders and that, but I think the same thing kind of applies here. Like, it's very uncomfortable to just I grew up in the South, Southern hospitality, Southern charm, all that stuff. You want to be polite and say hello and how are you, all that stuff. And it's uncomfortable for me to just sit in the silence.
Right.
But that's the safest thing to do. So you have to train yourself to do it. And even if, preferably you can train yourself to be comfortable with it. But if you can't, you just have to learn to be uncomfortable. Because you don't want to snitch on anybody, and you don't want to reveal anything that you don't have to. You always have the ability to invoke your Fifth Amendment right. In some cases, you can just not say anything. In some cases, I think like in some, municipalities or whatever, you have to say like, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to, shut up or whatever. So to remain silent. So, you might want to know that law in your area. But yeah, you can just shut up and not say anything.
So is it really just answering only when you need to? Yeah.
And yeah. You're trying to build a little bit of a rapport without being too chummy, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like you want to let them know like, hey, I'm hearing you and I'm going to try to work with you. I'm going to try to be cooperative here, but I'm also not going to, fall for your silly little tricks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a big delicate balance between like keeping your composure while still asserting your rights. Now, with that said, I don't believe it's a good tactic to be like, I know my rights, and like it doesn't really help in this situation. You can just explicitly say the rights very calmly, and then it's obvious that you know what you're talking about and you know your rights without being like, I know my rights. I also see that you posted in here, like, how would things be different if it was in a store disruption when the police came and you as the police liaison was inside when they came? And that's a really, really good question. Typically, like when that's going on, it's case by case, to be 100% honest. I've seen disruptions where the police let it slide because they witnessed an employee assault the activist. So they kind of like let it slide because they're like, well, if we charge them, we're going to have to charge him too. And they kind of let it slide. So it continued going on for quite a bit. And it wasn't until there was like a wall of like 22 cops that then everyone decided to walk out the store or walk out of the mall because it was a good idea at that point to do it. And then like, it would be a good idea for the police liaison to approach them right away. typically I've heard the police saying, you all have to go. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. So if the employees in the store are telling you you have to leave, legally, if you don't leave, they can all give you trespassing. So it's really up to the group to decide what they will do with that information. But I've seen a lot of disruptions where no one says anything until the police just suddenly arrive. So if the police suddenly just arrive and no one has told anyone to leave, usually like they'll say, oh, you got to go. And I was like, oh, no one in the store has said to leave, and that's truthful information. It's like, okay, but they asked me to tell you that you have to go, in which case you could do like hand signals, like wrap it up, and then, slowly walk out, make your way out, slowly while still chanting.
Yeah, I'll say a lot of times, like during a disruption as well, if you're trying to approach a police officer while they're trying to get to a big crowd of shouting people, like you're probably not going to have much luck. It really just depends on the demeanor of the officer. If they they're probably going to run in and tell everybody to start getting out immediately. And, at that point, hopefully the organizer or the group as a whole has decided, this is what we're going to do. If a police officer asks us to leave, we're either going to keep staying or we're going to leave. So, as a police liaison, I mean, you could go in or you could stand outside before they get there, and you could try to intercept and say, hey, do you want me to tell them they need to leave? Or, I mean, I guess you can do whatever you want, but yeah,
So,
a lot of times your role inside, I mean, the police are going to go straight to the people who are like making a scene. So I don't know how much a police liaison can even be effective while people are inside. Sometimes you can, but sometimes you might not get the opportunity.
Sometimes it might be good to have two police liaison, one inside, one outside, just in case. Because I've also seen where the police liaison was nowhere near when the police showed up. But also another tactic inside is if anyone inside the store is approaching the activists, the police liaison, especially if it's like an employee or a manager, can talk to them a little bit. And I've also seen where the police liaison will say, it'll just be a few minutes before they leave, to kind of like.
So when the police come, can they just go over to the police and say, like, we're leaving now, and then just walk out, basically?
Yeah, I think that's
or
fine.
Do you have to wait for them to be like, make sure that they're not detaining anyone?
Assume no one's being detained unless they say it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you guys.
Meredith, so much. I think we have a bunch of questions from the chat that we'll try to get to all of them. We'll do our best here. First one from Sean. What's the most aggressive or challenging encounter that you've had, and how did you deal with it? I don't know if either one you prefer not to answer.
For me, it was I will say that most of my police interactions have not been this way. So this is just like the one off, but the worst one, it was in Tar Heel, North Carolina, because we were at Smithfield, and we were trying to like see the pigs as they were going into the slaughterhouse. We were on public property, and at that point, like there was a road, and it would be better to be on this side of the road. This is the entrance to the slaughterhouse. It would be better to be on this side because the truck's on that side. They blockaded us and didn't allow us to cross the street. And the cops were like really aggressive, saying that they were going to arrest us if we didn't disperse. And we tried to push back a little bit. We did also have a permit until 5 p.m. and they were just trying to run the clock on us. And when 5 p.m. came, they never let us cross. They aggressively were about to like arrest us. And at that point, it's like your determination to see if it's worth it or not. So in that situation, we were touring and we were going to be going to a bunch of different places. And none of us live in Tar Heel. So it was just the risk assessment. We're like, it's not worth it. Like getting arrested in this specific county where Smithfield funds everyone, funds, like is probably in cahoots with the police department and the judges and everything. Like, how much of an impact will it have to be getting arrested and possibly be in custody for a pretty long time, I can imagine. So we did disperse and we left, and we didn't really give much pushback at that point because we knew that they were going to be serious. So it just goes to show that, you know, what may work in one location may not work in another location. And also what works with one cop may not work with another cop in the same location, because every individual that's in front of you is going to act differently, is going to, you know, some might actually advocate for your rights. I've had cops that as soon as they come up to us are like, yeah, it's your right to be here. I'm going to talk to the owners and let them know of your right. Maybe the owners say something and then they have to come back. So every interaction is very different, and it's really important to read that temperature and make the best judgment call that you can at that point in time.
Trey, anything to add?
1 second, my dogs are freaking out, and I'll tell you a story.
Okay. Okay, everybody pause.
I got a story.
All right, Leaf.
I was at AOC. I wasn't the police liaison. Wayne Shung was the police liaison. We had just gone in, disrupted a farm, taken out about 35 chickens in Petaluma, California, the largest egg farm in the state of California. And the cool thing was, we were planning on going back in. The cops were there, like 30 cops there. They lined this up one side of the road in front of the business. We had about 500 activists lining the other side of the road of the business. The sheriff and Wayne were standing in the middle of the road, and they would talk. Wayne would come over to our side, and he had like a secondary liaison who was Paul Picklesheimer. And they would come over to our side. They'd ask us a question. You know, we'd kind of like, he'd read the activist temperature, and then he'd go back to the cop and he'd give him our answer. And then he came back, and finally, like, it was stalling, and we were there for like hours. So we said, we're going back in. We went back in, and they arrested like 70 of us. But it ended up pretty good because we crowded the jails, and they eventually just kicked everybody out because we were gonna cause trouble in jail with like a not eating, and it would have gotten into a medical issue, and we weren't violent. So the fact that we kept it non-violent really helped our side. But I thought it was really cool that Wayne was like, he was amazing at negotiating, and that's something I want to learn.
Yeah, he should be with us here. Great story, Leaf. Thank you. Trey, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, sorry, before my dog started freaking out, I was gonna tell you about the previous question about the most aggressive a cop has ever been. In Chicago, during the Chicago convergence, I was dealing with this officer who was trying to say that we were breaking a noise ordinance, and I was the police liaison. And he was trying to say that, you know, the people using the megaphones and the whistles, if we don't stop, they're gonna give us a citation, and if we don't accept the ticket, then everybody will be physically arrested. And then, you know, he finally gave us the citation. Well, first of all, like, he was like yelling at me and stuff, so loud that his voice was cracking and stuff. Like, he was just screaming at me, and every time he did, I would just kind of be like, okay, you know, I'm just asking this question, man, you know. So, and there's actually a video of pretty much the entire interaction on AAM's YouTube channel. There's a playlist, and you can go to police interactions, and it's there. But toward the end of that interaction, after dealing with him for a really long time, you know, he gave us an ordinance that said, he gave us a noise ordinance and tried to say that that's the ordinance they were using. And the ordinance, didn't apply to us because, well, it didn't apply to us for a couple of reasons. Because you know, we weren't within the time frame. I think it was like maybe 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. You can't make noise or something like that. And it was also about, it specifically said that it didn't apply to public assembly, which is what we're doing, a public assembly. And it also basically was rules about, like, you know, if somebody's having like a concert in town or something like that, you know, it was just something totally bogus. And he would not listen to me. He wouldn't even talk to me. He would just like turn his shoulder and walk away, wouldn't communicate with me at all, wouldn't give me a chance to explain my side. I'm asking him to read the whole ordinance. Like, do you know what you're trying to enforce here? And I did something that I don't recommend that people do, but I did it because I didn't do it because I lost control of my emotions. I did it because I really didn't feel like I had anything else that I could do in that moment. So I basically started chanting at him, "Do your job." Again, I don't recommend that people really do that, but I did it because at that point, like, what else are you supposed to do? He's the white shirt on duty. He's the supervisor, and he won't even listen to you. So at that point, and then later during that whole interaction, he assaulted a child that was with the activists. It was a lot of crazy stuff going on. But you know, some other blue shirts walked up and we were like, is he allowed to do this? And is he allowed to do that? And if he gives you an unlawful order, do you have to listen to it? And blah, blah. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. so you can see the whole interaction on YouTube, and we put in the description, like, you know, we don't really recommend that method. But for me, I felt like I had no other trick up my sleeve. You know what I mean? He kind of put me against a wall. And, you know, so we kind of started protesting the police at that point, saying, hey, do your job, do your job. And the next day we showed up to the same place and had almost no issues. But I'll say that I don't remember what day it was. We were going to the same places over and over. And I don't remember what day it was, but we had been in several days by the time that, you know, all this stuff happened. And I want to say that being a police liaison during a multi-day event, day one is much different than day 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's very different because, you know, if the cops just think you're doing this one-time protest and then you're going to go away and they're never going to see you again, they're going to treat you a lot different if they know that you're going to come back day after day after day until you get what you want. So you need to keep that in mind. Cops are going to be potentially way more hostile later on. The cop, if you watch the video that I'm talking about, he even admits that he's trying to protect the people who are bothered by us. And I said, you know, okay, well, it's not, you know, we're not breaking a law by bothering them. You know what I mean? Just because they're bothered doesn't mean we're breaking a law. So, so keep that in mind. Cops are very different on day 5 of a protest as opposed to day 1 or day 2. So yeah, keep that in mind and never lose control of your emotions. Again, that's not what I did in the video. I did it because I felt like I couldn't do anything else, but it can be easy to lose your emotions.
Situational awareness, Trey. And that goes to speak of, like, when you're a police liaison, it's important to have good situational awareness and adapt how you're interacting based on the situation. And that's exactly what you did. All right, next question.
It's now a good training up. I'll get to it, Chris. I got it. So, yeah. So Josh in the chat asked, should the liaison also be filming? I think you may have covered this, or should someone else be the camera person?
Both
It's really up to you, but the more angles, the better. And also, typically, if you're filming yourself, you'll get better audio quality than somebody who might be a little further away trying to film. Like, they might be able to see it on camera, but if there's a lot of screaming and chanting in the background, it may be very difficult to hear what's actually being said.
Yeah, another thing is, you know, I've had instances where I have said, like, hey, can you film this? And then, you know, I get it back and either their phone is like compressing things because it's full, or it's like a way, way older phone or something, and the footage is just not as useful. So, you know, keep that in mind. Like, whoever's recording, try to make sure, you know, they've, you know, got adequate equipment, whether that be a phone or, you know, something else.
It could be another training. Marco in the chat asks, if an officer says, please put the camera away, what's a non-confrontational way to respond to that? And another question, if they ask your name, is it okay to just say it in order to be less confrontational?
Yeah, so for the first question, you can always say, you know, we have a right to record the police in the course of their duties. Very calmly to say that, and that's a fact in the United States. Again, look up the laws where you're from. It might not be the same in different countries. And then if they ask your name, is it okay just to say, yeah, so that's up to each police liaison, what they decide to do in order to keep the protest going. You can try just saying your first name if you don't want to give your full name. And in some instances, they might ask for ID, and that's your call to make. It's really important that, like, that's your autonomy. So you make that judgment call for yourself. There are pros and cons to each technique. Let's say you do give your ID and now they have your full name, and now they can look up all your associates online. So that could be potentially an issue. Or I don't know, maybe they're getting the names of every activist they can, and every time there's a new police liaison, now they have a list of people. So it's your judgment call to make. I would say it's pretty safe to just give your first name if you feel comfortable. But I've also had moments where I don't give my name at all. So
I personally never give my name if I can help it, unless I'm being detained and I have to provide ID for some reason. I don't give my name. You can always say something like, you know, you can call me Dave. Well, your name might not be Dave, and you didn't tell them your name is Dave. You said you can call me Dave. So, you know, if you want to say something like that, you could, or just say, hey, just call me this, or like Kristy said earlier, just call me Good Citizen, or something like that. You know, that's fine. I personally don't like to give my name. If you want to give your first name, you know, that's your thing, but I don't see a reason to.
So Tenebrae asks, is it perceived as antagonistic to say nothing?
we can't control whatever they perceive. You know, at the end of the day, their perception is whatever their perception might be. But if you're not saying anything, it might just be a good idea to just, and you can tell that that's bothering them. You can just say, you know, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment rights right now, just so that they are clear and it doesn't, I guess, seem disrespectful. Even though in some places you actually have to invoke your Fifth Amendment rights, it seems as, depending on how the laws are written in the state or in the city, if you don't specifically say that you're invoking your Fifth Amendment rights, it's assumed that you didn't, and that your silence can be held against you. So maybe just say, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment rights.
Yeah, you can also maybe even just change the subject, you know, if they're trying to, you know, like in the video there where he was trying to get me to admit that somebody, you know, dropped coffee or something, you know, I could just say like, hey, I can tighten the circle up for you. If you know, I can just change the subject. And if they force the issue, which usually you can just change the subject and they'll go with that. But if they don't, and they're really hammering you and forcing the issue, you just say, hey, I you know, no disrespect, but I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent to that question. And you're fully within your rights to do that. And while, yeah, I mean, it might piss a cop off, but you know what? A lot of cops get pissed off if you show them any kind of resistance whatsoever. If you don't do exactly what they say, they might get upset because a lot of them, you know, want you to just listen to what they say or whatever. You know, they might just be power hungry or whatever. Who knows? I mean, every individual is different, but you know, you got to do what you got to do to keep yourself safe. Now, it might piss this cop off, but later, if something were to go to court for some reason or something, you know, you've covered your butt by saying I invoke my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. You know, you've done the right thing. And, you know, I'd rather deal with a little bit of being uncomfortable in the moment of a protest than to, you know, say something that doesn't need to be said, for sure.
Also, I guess it's important to say, like, if you are being arrested, you are not legally obligated to answer the questions, and you can absolutely invoke your Fifth Amendment rights. That's an important thing to mention. And there's something else I had in mind that came to mind. With the story about the cops at Smithfield, and this could be a good question to ask. You know, are you on duty right now? Because sometimes they might just be working security for that business, and that lets you know if they're acting as a taxpayer funded police officer in that moment, or if they're just being paid by that corporation. And I guess, you know, in the Smithfield situation, they didn't want to answer that question, which I guess was very telling.
It can get murky though. If you've got security who are actually police, they're still police. So for example, not that anybody should be hitting anyone, but like if you hit that person, you'd be charged with, you know, like hitting a police officer, you know, because they're a police officer, even though they're not acting as a police officer in that moment. But it gets real murky because whenever they decide they kind of want to be a police officer, they can be like, it's weird. So I'm not sure the exact law on it. That might be something you want to look into further, but if they're a police officer, they're a police officer, whether they're on duty or not, they're still a police officer. And there's certain things you can't do. Now, sometimes when they're on the security team at a place, you know, they may not have jurisdiction in that county or in that city or whatever. And, you know, there are some things about being off duty that matter as well. But, you know, you kind of want to be aware of all those different kinds of situations. But, you know, really, if they are, if they're a police officer, you know, if they're security that are off-duty police, you know, a lot of times they're not going to try to give you lawful commands, but sometimes they might, and you need to know how you might want to handle that if the situation arises.
It could also be great information just for you to kind of see what angle they're coming at you from. If they're being paid to stop the protest, that's something to keep into consideration. You know, it kind of, they still took an oath to uphold the Constitution, but, you know, money can alter a person's perspective. So
I think we have time for one or two more. Let's see. Another question in the chat, besides not talking to the police, are there any other general things the police commonly will make you do or lie to you about that you shouldn't listen to them on? For example, at a protest, an officer told some activists to get off a bench, but some did and some didn't. Is that something that's illegal? Sitting on a bench?
I would say that you can just ask them, what law are they breaking? Where's the ordinance? Show me in almost every situation, if they're giving you an order that you have questions on, just ask for them to give you the law, and to make sure that it's a lawful order and they're not. So the thing with police, they can ask you to do anything, whether it's a lawful order or not. And if it's not technically a lawful order, if you abide by it, it's considered to be that you did that on your own free will, that you didn't invoke your own rights. So like, it's really up to us to know our rights a little bit better, to stand up for them, because, you know, police will ask you for ID, and if you give it to them, it will be said in court that you decided to forfeit that right. So read up on your rights, look at the laws in your local place. It's really, really important, and always ask questions. And Trey mentioned it earlier, you'll often find that, and I've even found that oftentimes police officers aren't very well informed on the ordinances that they're meant to uphold or the laws, but they are used to just people listening to whatever it is that they tell them to do, and people typically do. So sometimes it even catches them off guard when you're like, well, what ordinance is that? I believe you're mistaken. Like, sometimes I'm like, I looked this up online prior to this and I didn't see that. So if I'm mistaken, I'd like to know what ordinance it is, because according to the research I did ahead of time, this is perfectly legal, and I don't want you to step over everyone's First Amendment rights. And then that can also help prolong the action too, while they try and figure out what the actual laws are.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you want to know what the law is. Again, we're not attorneys, we're not lawyers, but you know, you might want to know what the law is, I guess, about sitting on a bench if you really want to test it. But usually, I mean, if it's a public bench, then you or anybody else should be able to sit on it as you please for the most part. I guess maybe they could try to get you with like loitering or, something stupid like that, maybe. But, what I usually do is say like, well, like Kristy said, well, what law or ordinance am I breaking? And if they don't want to go into that, I'll say, well, will I be arrested or ticketed if I continue to sit here? See what they say, because if they say, yes, you will be arrested if you don't get up off that bench, you might be in for a nice payday. If you've got that on film, because I don't think they can do that. Again, I'm not an attorney, but yeah, I mean, I would think that a public bench you should be able to sit on as you please, unless there's some kind of context about the situation that I don't know about.
Did I miss any questions? If so, if you could ask it again in the chat. We'll just take one more because we will need to wrap up as well, so we don't go too long. But
While
did I miss anyone's questions?
While we're waiting to see if there's another question, yeah, I want to mention, like, about the bench thing. In that same video that I was talking about, the one where I ended up chanting against the cop at the end, if you go and watch that video, there's a spot where he lines up all his blue shirts in front of the sergeant, lines up all his blue shirts in front of the store and tells them to keep us 5 feet away from the store, which 5 feet away is public property on the sidewalk. So, we had been doing a picket line, or the activists had been doing a picket line. And, I said, I went up to the blue shirts because the white shirt, it was like a dual protest going on. The white shirt had walked off to the other protest. So I went up to the blue shirts and I said, hey, like, what's the deal? Are you going to arrest us if we're within 5 feet? Can you show me the 5-foot ordinance? I don't know about a 5-foot ordinance, like, what's going on here? And you can watch that in the video and kind of pick up on it. And eventually I just press them and press them and press them. And the guy finally says, no, I'm not going to arrest you. You can do what you want. Like, just do what you were doing. And so we went right back to doing what we were doing because there's no 5-foot ordinance. When he was pressed, if I said, hey, are we going to get arrested if we do a picket line right here? He finally said no. So you can watch that video. That might be a way that you can kind of, figure that out.
All the more reason to go to our YouTube channel right after this and make sure you subscribe and look around in there. I don't see any final questions, so I'm going to wrap up. But Trey or Kristy, I can throw it back to you for any final words or final message, final tip.
I think we covered quite a bit. Just want to remind everyone that it can vary from city to city, state to state, country to country, and with the police officer that's in front of you. So there are things that you'll also learn along the way. And, once you start, you'll gain more and more experience interacting with the police. And it's important to kind of like self-assess afterwards and think about, like, how did that go? What did I say? Could I have worded anything better? Did I accidentally say something I didn't need, like Trey did with the video? So that can kind of like help you sharpen those skills.
Yeah, I'll say, like, being a police liaison is a big responsibility. You have a lot of people's safety kind of in your hands. They're really trusting you to, do the right thing. So it can feel like a lot of pressure, because it kind of is, but there's so few activists out there, and I'm inspired that people showed up to this and want to learn more about it, because we all have a role to play, and adding police liaison to your arsenal of skills is great, because you might find yourself at a protest and you're the only person that has any police liaison experience, or if none of you have experience, you might be the only one that's ever went to a workshop about being a police liaison. So, while it is a lot of responsibility, that you should take seriously, I would say don't be afraid to just do it. Because you're probably, if you know something about it, then you're probably going to be able to keep everybody safer than someone else. You know what I mean? So if you feel comfortable enough to be a police liaison, please do it. If you think that you might do it, take it as seriously as you can. You're already doing that by being at this workshop. But, especially if you have a friend who's a lawyer, if you have any questions that, maybe there's a movement lawyer who might let you pick their brain a little bit, or maybe there's ordinances and things that you can look up, just do that and take it seriously, because it is an important role. Don't feel like you need to, have so much information that every law about everything, but be smart about it, look up the key stuff, beforehand, just kind of, know what the general rules are in your country and what you might expect. And some things you'll have to play by ear. If the cop brings up something, an ordinance that you didn't know about, you can say, oh, show it to me, just kind of, you can go with the flow and things like that a little bit. If you didn't get a chance to meticulously research before every single protest or whatever. So I would say, yeah, don't be like too afraid. And best of luck out there with your police liaisoning. You can always contact me if you have any questions. Hope I can be a resource for you. Hope AAM can be a resource for you.
Yeah, you can always contact me as well. And I will say, the very, very first time I ever was police liaison was after attending a workshop just like this. So, I feel like a lot of you have a lot of good information, and I definitely want to encourage you that if no one else has attended a workshop and you feel comfortable, step up to the plate.
Okay, friends, that's our workshop, but hold on another moment. Let me just make a few final announcements. Our upcoming workshops. This Friday, June 2nd, we have Ending Speciesism, the History, Future, and Power of the Animal Rights Movement, with author James Mason. On June 8th, we have The Humane Hoax, How to Expose Happy Meat, Humane Dairy, and Ethical Eggs, with author Hope Bohanec. On June 15th, You Can Teach an Old Dog New Tricks, Going Vegan Later in Life, with Eric Lindstrom, Director of Farm. On July 13th, we have Communication Skills and Coping Tools for Activists. On July 20th, we have The Turning Point in the Animal Freedom Movement with one of our mentors, Robert Grillo. And more workshops to be announced. And again, please check out our previous workshops on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and subscribe. I'd also like to announce our 2023 live events. The Colorado Convergence is taking place in and around Denver. The dates are June 24th through July 1st, coming up. The Portland, Oregon Convergence is August 4th through the 12th, and the Ohio Occurrence is September 1st in and around Cincinnati. If anybody wants to drop the links for those events in the chat, but you can also find all that on our website, I believe. No experience required, but registration is required, especially if you want a spot in the house. So you'll find the events on our Facebook page and website, and hopefully here in the chat. So please consider becoming a patron by finding AAM on Patreon. Your donations allow AAM to continue to provide free educational resources for activists, which ultimately saves more animals. And that wraps up another AAM workshop. Thank you, Trey and Kristy. A big hand for them, you guys, right? Big thumbs up, 5 stars, awesome, for your time and wisdom. Thank you all for being here and the tireless work you're doing for the animals, seriously. And if you're interested in becoming a mentor or mentee or want to get involved with AAM, please reach out to us. If you'd like to be on our email newsletter list, drop your email in the chat and we'll add you. And until next time, stay strong, everyone, and live vegan.